Hey everyone, I'm here to help you relax and drift off tonight. If you enjoy using these videos to fall asleep, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more calming content. Share where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'd love to know. Now settle into a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's start unwinding together. In the picturesque town of Everpine, Christmas was a season of warmth and joy. The town was famous for its grand Christmas tree that stood proudly in the square, decorated with ornaments donated by townsfolk each year. Every ornament had a story, a memory shared by those who loved the season. But one year an ornament arrived with a far darker tale, one that would haunt the town forever. The story began when Eliza Thorne, an elderly woman who had lived on the outskirts of town for decades, passed away unexpectedly. Known for being reclusive and bitter, Eliza was seldom seen during town gatherings, especially Christmas celebrations. Rumors swirled about her tragic past. It was said she had lost her family in a fire on Christmas Eve many years ago, and since then, she had despised the holiday. After her death, the townsfolk went to clean out her old home. Among the cobwebs and dust, they found a box filled with Christmas ornaments, something no one expected from someone like Eliza. The ornaments were simple glass baubles, except for one, a striking crimson ornament with golden swirls carved into the glass. It shimmered unnaturally, as though it held a light of its own. "That one looks special," said Margaret, one of the volunteers. "It would look beautiful on the town tree." The others agreed, and soon the crimson ornament found its place at the top of the grand Christmas tree in the square. No one noticed the slight chill in the air when it was hung, nor did they hear the faint whisper that followed. That night, as the town prepared for the annual Christmas Eve celebration, strange things began to happen. The festive lights flickered unpredictably, casting long, eerie shadows. The cheerful music playing from the speakers distorted, sounding like faint cries instead of carols. Meanwhile, in her warm, decorated living room, Margaret sat with her family, sipping hot cocoa. Suddenly, the fire in the hearth dimmed, and a draft swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. The crimson ornament came to her mind, and she felt a strange unease. She brushed it off as holiday stress, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. By midnight, more peculiar events unfolded. Children reported seeing a shadowy figure moving around the square, but when their parents checked, no one was there. Houses near the square grew unnaturally cold, despite roaring fires in their hearths. Even the town's pets acted strangely, barking and howling at nothing. Margaret, unable to sleep, decided to visit the town square. She was joined by her friend Thomas, who had also felt uneasy since the ornament was placed on the tree. When they reached the square, they found the grand tree swaying slightly, though there was no wind. The crimson ornament at the top glowed faintly, casting a red hue over the snow. "We need to take that ornament down," Thomas said, his voice trembling. But as they approached the tree, a chilling voice echoed through the square. "You took everything from me, now I will take from you." Margaret and Thomas froze as a figure emerged from the shadows, a translucent, ghostly form of an elderly woman. It was Eliza Thorne. Her eyes burned with fury, and her form flickered like a dying flame. "I was forgotten," Eliza whispered, her voice filled with bitterness. "On that cold Christmas Eve, while you all celebrated, I lost my family. None of you cared. None of you came." Margaret tried to speak, but the cold intensified, making it hard to breathe. Eliza raised a ghostly hand, and the ground beneath them cracked, as though something dark and ancient was awakening. "You will feel my pain," Eliza hissed. "You will suffer as I did." Thomas, shaking with fear, shouted, "It wasn't our fault. We didn't know." "You knew," Eliza said coldly. "You knew I was alone, and you chose to look away. Now this town will know the cost of forgetting." Margaret realized they couldn't fight Eliza with force. "Eliza, we're sorry," she said, her voice quivering. "We didn't understand your pain. Let us help you find peace." Eliza hesitated, her form flickering. "Peace? After all this time?" Margaret continued. "Your family wouldn't want you to suffer like this. They would want you to find peace, to be remembered with love, not hate." For a moment, silence fell over the square. Then the crimson ornament cracked, and a bright light emerged from within. The ghostly form of Eliza seemed to soften, her eyes losing their fiery glow. "My family," she whispered, a tear falling from her spectral eye. The light enveloped her, and with one final, sorrowful glance, she vanished into the night. The crimson ornament shattered completely, and the eerie cold lifted. The lights on the tree glowed brightly once more, casting a warm, comforting light over the town. The next day, the townsfolk gathered in the square. Margaret and Thomas told them what had happened, and the town decided to honor Eliza's memory each Christmas. They created a new ornament in her likeness, a golden bauble with crimson swirls, and placed it on the tree every year to remind themselves of those who might be forgotten during the festive season. From that day forward, the Christmas spirit in Everpine grew stronger, not just in celebration, but in compassion. And though the cursed ornament was gone, on cold winter nights, some claimed they could still hear Eliza's voice, not in anger, but in gratitude, whispering through the snow. "Thank you for remembering." Thus, the curse of the crimson ornament became a tale of forgiveness and remembrance, a lesson that no one, no matter how lonely or bitter, should be left in the shadows during the season of light. The town of Winters Hollow was known for its grand New Year's Eve celebration. Every December 31st, families gathered in the town square, bundled in warm coats and scarves, waiting for the stroke of midnight when the clock tower would chime 12 times, signaling the start of a new year. But one year something strange happened, something that would trap the townsfolk in an endless loop of terror. December 31st arrived, and Winters Hollow was alive with excitement. Twinkling lights decorated every building, and the streets were packed with people laughing, singing, and drinking hot cider. In the center of the square stood the ancient midnight clock, an ornate structure built centuries ago by the town's founders. Its face was a brilliant gold, and its chimes had marked the start of every new year for generations. Among the crowd was Eleanor Gray, a local historian. She had always been fascinated by the midnight clock's history. Rumors said that the clock was cursed, though no one took the tale seriously. The story went that one of the founders, Isaac Thorne, had been betrayed by his partners on New Year's Eve many years ago. In his final moments, as the clock struck midnight, he vowed that the town would never truly move forward until justice was served. That night, Eleanor stood near the clock, feeling a strange unease. The air seemed colder than usual, and the clock's golden face gleamed unnaturally in the moonlight. As midnight approached, the crowd began the countdown. 10, 9, 8. Eleanor's heart pounded. Something felt wrong. She couldn't explain it, but an overwhelming sense of dread washed over her. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! The clock struck 12, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Fireworks lit up the sky in bursts of red, blue, and gold. But as the 12th chime echoed through the square, a strange fog rolled in, blanketing the town in an eerie haze. The sounds of celebration faded, replaced by an unnatural silence. Suddenly, the clock began to chime again, starting from 1. The crowd, confused, stopped cheering. They looked around, puzzled, as the clock continued to strike. By the time it reached 12 again, a sense of unease had settled over everyone. Then something terrifying happened. The fog thickened, and shadows emerged from the mist. Figures with hollow eyes and ghostly forms. They moved through the crowd silently, touching some of the townsfolk, who immediately froze in place, their eyes wide with fear. Eleanor tried to run, but the ground beneath her feet felt like it was shifting. She stumbled, falling near the base of the midnight clock. Looking up, she saw one of the ghostly figures approaching her. It raised a hand, but before it could touch her, everything went black. When Eleanor opened her eyes, she was back in the town square. The air was filled with laughter, the lights twinkled, and people were counting down to midnight. Confused, she looked around and realized something chilling. It was the exact same moment as before. Time had reset. 10, 9, 8. "No, this can't be happening," Eleanor whispered, her breath visible in the cold air. She tried to warn those around her, but no one seemed to notice her panic. They continued counting down, oblivious to what had happened. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! Again, the clock struck 12. The fog rolled in, and the ghostly figures appeared. This time, Eleanor was ready. She grabbed her friend Daniel, pulling him toward the edge of the square. "We're trapped in a loop," she said urgently. "I don't know how, but we're repeating the same night." Daniel, skeptical but concerned by Eleanor's fear, followed her. They watched as the scene played out exactly as before. People freezing in place, shadows moving silently through the crowd. Before they could escape, the fog consumed them, and everything went black once more. Over the next few repetitions, Eleanor gathered as much information as she could. Each loop was identical, down to the last second. No matter what they did, midnight always reset time, and the ghostly figures always appeared. Desperate for answers, Eleanor remembered the tale of Isaac Thorne. Could his curse be real? She needed to find a way to break the loop before they were trapped forever. In one of the loops, she led Daniel to the town archives. Together, they searched through old records, finally uncovering a dusty journal written by Isaac himself. The final entry read, "On this New Year's Eve, I have been betrayed. My time is at an end, but theirs shall never begin. Until my name is cleared, they will remain frozen in the past, unable to truly move forward." Eleanor realized that the only way to break the curse was to clear Isaac's name. But how could she do that in a town where time reset every night? In the next loop, Eleanor and Daniel decided to confront the midnight clock itself. They climbed the tower just before midnight, finding a hidden compartment within its base. Inside was a locket containing a portrait of Isaac Thorne and a letter he had written, proving his innocence. He hadn't betrayed the founders. They had betrayed him. As the countdown began, Eleanor held the locket high and shouted, "We know the truth, Isaac. You were wronged, and we're here to set you free." The 12th chime rang out, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the fog began to recede, and the ghostly figures stopped moving. One by one, they turned toward Eleanor, their hollow eyes filled with a sense of release. The figure of Isaac Thorne appeared, his expression no longer one of vengeance, but of peace. "Thank you," he whispered, before vanishing along with the shadows. The next time midnight struck, there was no fog, no reset. The townsfolk cheered as fireworks lit up the sky, unaware of how close they had come to being trapped forever. Only Eleanor and Daniel remembered the loops, but they didn't mind. They had saved the town and broken the curse. Every New Year's Eve after that, Eleanor would stand by the midnight clock, watching as the town celebrated, grateful for the chance to move forward. The curse was gone, but the story lived on, a reminder that sometimes the past must be faced before the future can truly begin. And so Winter's Hollow welcomed each new year with open arms, knowing that its darkest night had finally ended. In the quiet town of Rosewood, Valentine's Day was always a special occasion. Every year, couples flocked to the town square, which was decorated with strings of fairy lights and garlands of red roses. Music played softly in the background, and the sweet scent of chocolate and fresh blooms filled the air. But few knew that Rosewood carried a haunting secret, one that surfaced only on Valentine's Day. Long ago, there was a legend whispered among the older residents of the town. On the night of Valentine's Day, ghosts would rise, seeking the lovers they had lost. Most dismissed it as an old folktale meant to add a spooky charm to the holiday. But this year, the town would learn that legends often hold more truth than they realize. It was the evening before Valentine's Day, and Lillian Moore, a florist, was busy preparing for the busiest day of the year. Her small shop, Rose Petals and Promises, was filled with bouquets of red and pink roses, daisies, and lilies. As she worked late into the night, arranging flowers by candlelight, she noticed something strange. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and a faint whisper filled the air. "Lillian!" She spun around, her heart racing. The shop was empty, but the whisper seemed to linger, wrapping around her like a cold breeze. Shaking off the unease, she returned to her work, telling herself it was just her imagination. But deep down, she felt that something was coming, something she couldn't explain. The next evening, as Valentine's celebrations began, couples gathered in the square, exchanging gifts and enjoying the festive atmosphere. Lillian, carrying a large basket of roses, made her way through the crowd, smiling at familiar faces. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she saw a man dressed in old-fashioned clothing, an elegant suit that looked like it belonged to another era. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice carrying a hint of sorrow. Have you seen a woman named Isabel? She was supposed to meet me here." Lillian blinked in confusion. Something about the man seemed off. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes held a deep, haunting sadness. Before she could answer, he vanished into the crowd, leaving her shaken. Moments later, an elderly woman approached Lillian. "Did you see him?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. "That's Henry Whitaker. He's been dead for over a century. Every Valentine's Day he returns, searching for his lost fiancée, Isabel." Lillian felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard the legend of Henry and Isabel, a tragic love story from the town's past. Isabel had died in a fire the night before their wedding, and Henry, heartbroken, had disappeared, never to be seen again. According to the legend, his ghost returned every Valentine's Day, hoping to reunite with his lost love. As the night went on, more ghosts appeared. Some wandered the square silently, while others approached living couples, asking strange, sorrowful questions. One ghost, a young woman in a white gown, wept softly near the fountain, whispering the name of a lover lost in war. Another, an elderly man, carried a withered rose, looking around as if searching for someone he could no longer find. The townsfolk, initially frightened, soon realized that the spirits meant no harm. They were not here to haunt or scare, but to seek closure, to find the lovers they had lost in life. Lillian, still holding her basket of roses, felt an overwhelming sense of sadness. She decided she had to do something to help these souls find peace. Lillian gathered a few friends, including Daniel, the town historian, and Clara, a local artist known for her belief in the supernatural. Together, they devised a plan. Daniel suggested that the spirits might find peace if they were given a symbol of their love, a rose for each lost lover. "We can't bring back those they've lost," Daniel said, "but perhaps a gesture, a reminder of love, might help them move on." With that, Lillian and her friends began distributing roses to the wandering spirits. Each ghost who received a rose paused, touched by the gesture. Some wept, while others smiled faintly before vanishing into the night. As midnight approached, Lillian realized that Henry Whitaker had not yet found peace. She searched the square, finally spotting him near the old oak tree where she and Isabel had once carved their initials. He stood there, staring at the tree, his expression a mix of longing and sorrow. "Henry," Lillian called gently, approaching him. She held out a single crimson rose. "For Isabel." Henry took the rose, his ghostly fingers brushing against hers. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. "I've waited so long. Perhaps now I can let go." As he held the rose, a soft light surrounded him, and for a brief moment, Lillian thought she saw another figure standing beside him. A woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. It was Isabel, her spirit finally reunited with Henry. They embraced, and together they faded into the night. The next morning, the town awoke to find the square filled with roses, each one left by a spirit who had found peace. The legend of the ghosts of Valentine's Day spread far and wide, but it was no longer a tale of fear. It became a story of love enduring beyond death, of souls seeking closure and connection. Every year after that, Rosewood held a special ceremony on Valentine's Day. Couples would gather in the square, not just to celebrate their own love, but to honor those who had loved and lost. They would place roses at the base of the midnight clock, believing that the spirit still visited, watching quietly from the shadows. And Lillian, standing at her shop window, would smile, knowing that she had played a part in helping those lost souls find their way home. Thus, Valentine's Day in Rosewood became more than just a day for the living. It became a day for all lovers, past and present, to be remembered. And on cold February nights, when the wind whispered through the trees, some swore they could hear the faint laughter of ghostly lovers, reunited at last. The town of Silent Hollow was like any other small, forgotten town. Nestled deep in a valley surrounded by thick woods, it was quiet, unassuming, and isolated. Life in Silent Hollow moved slowly, with its few hundred residents going about their daily routines, farming, working at the local mill, or running the few shops that lined the main street. Yet Silent Hollow held a sinister secret that few dared to speak of. People disappeared here, and they disappeared after hearing a strange, haunting hum. No one remembered exactly when the disappearances started. The older residents said it had been happening for as long as they could remember. It wasn't frequent, perhaps one or two people a year, but it was enough to cast a shadow over the town. Those who vanished left no trace. They would hear the hum, grow distant and quiet, and then, one day, they would simply be gone. At first, people tried to rationalize it. They blamed wolves in the forest, or that the missing might have moved to the city without telling anyone. But deep down, they knew the truth. Once you heard the hum, you were as good as lost. It had been almost a year since the last disappearance when Ethan Bell, a young man of 25, first heard the hum. He was working in the fields, tending to his crops, when a low melodic vibration filled the air. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. A strange, otherworldly tone that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It sent a chill down his spine. "Did you hear that?" he asked his neighbor, Martha, who was working nearby. "Hear what?" she replied, looking up from her work. Ethan frowned. "Never mind." He tried to brush it off, but the hum lingered in his mind, growing louder with each passing day, even when no one else could hear it. Soon he began to lose sleep, haunted by the sound that seemed to come from within him. Word spread quickly that Ethan had heard the hum. Silent Hollow was a superstitious town, and its people avoided him, fearing that whatever fate awaited him might spread to them. Even his closest friends kept their distance. Only Clara, his childhood friend, dared to approach him. "You need to leave, Ethan," she said one night as they sat on the porch of his small home. "People who hear the hum, they don't stay around for long. Maybe if you go far enough, you can escape it." Ethan shook his head. "I don't think it works like that. It feels like it's calling me, like it's inside me." Clara didn't know how to respond. All she could do was sit beside him, hoping that somehow he would be the first to break the curse. As the days passed, the hum grew louder, and Ethan began to change. He grew pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. He started hearing whispers in addition to the hum, soft voices that beckoned him toward the woods that bordered the town. One night, unable to bear it any longer, he decided to follow the sound. Taking only a lantern, he set off toward the forest. Clara, unwilling to let him go alone, insisted on coming with him. "If you're going, I'm going too," she said firmly. Together they entered the dense woods, the trees casting long shadows in the moonlight. The deeper they went, the louder the hum became, resonating through the air like a living thing. Clara began to feel it too, not as strongly as Ethan, but enough to make her uneasy. After hours of walking, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a large, ancient stone, covered in strange, glowing symbols. The hum emanated from the stone, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Ethan approached the stone, drawn to it as if in a trance. "This is it," he whispered. "This is what's been calling me." Clara tried to pull him back, but he was fixated on the stone. As he touched it, a blinding light engulfed the clearing. When it faded, Clara found herself alone. Ethan was gone, vanished without a trace. Terrified, she ran back to the town, but no one believed her story. They thought she was delusional, traumatized by Ethan's disappearance. But Clara knew what she had seen, and she was determined to find out the truth. Over the next few weeks, Clara studied the town's history, searching for any clue about the stone. She discovered old records that spoke of an ancient tribe that once lived in the valley. According to legend, the tribe had angered a powerful spirit who cursed the land with the hum, a sound that lured people to their doom. The only way to break the curse, the records said, was to confront the spirit and offer something it desired, courage and sacrifice. Clara knew what she had to do. She returned to the clearing alone, standing before the stone as the hum grew deafening. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. "Take me if you must, but release the others. End this curse." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground trembled and the stone cracked open, revealing a blinding light. Clara felt herself being pulled toward it, but instead of resisting, she embraced it. When Clara opened her eyes, she was standing in the town square. Around her, people began to emerge from the shadows, those who had vanished over the years, including Ethan. They looked confused but unharmed, as if awakening from a long sleep. The hum was gone, and the air felt lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted. The townsfolk gathered, astonished by the return of their loved ones. Clara, exhausted but relieved, smiled as Ethan approached her. "You did it," he said. "You broke the curse." Silent Hollow was never the same after that night. The hum never returned, and the disappearances became a distant memory. Clara was hailed as a hero, though she insisted she had only done what anyone would have done for a friend. And so the town moved on, free from the shadow of the hum. But on quiet nights when the wind was still, some claimed they could hear a faint echo in the distance, a reminder of the curse that had once haunted Silent Hollow. In the small town of Raven Creek, stories of a mysterious car had been circulating for decades. Locals whispered about a sleek black sedan with tinted windows that would appear on empty roads late at night. No one knew who or what was behind the wheel. The few who had encountered it were never seen again. Some believed it was an urban legend, while others swore they had seen the car lurking at the edge of town, waiting for its next victim. Despite the tales, life in Raven Creek went on as usual. Teenagers gathered around campfires to share spooky stories about the phantom car, and old-timers at the diner would swap tales of its eerie sightings. Yet no one truly believed they would ever encounter it, until one fateful night changed everything. It was late on a chilly autumn evening when Jake Harper, a mechanic, was driving home after a long shift at the garage. His old pickup truck rattled along the deserted road leading out of town. The road was dark, with only the dim glow of his headlights cutting through the thick fog that had settled in. Jake was exhausted, eager to get home and rest, when he noticed something strange in his rearview mirror. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, growing closer at an alarming speed. The car moved so fast that within seconds it was right behind him, its headlights glaring in his mirror. Jake frowned. "Who's driving like a maniac out here at this hour?" he muttered. He slowed down, expecting the car to pass him, but it didn't. Instead, it stayed right on his tail, matching his every move. Feeling uneasy, Jake tried to speed up, but the car stayed with him, its presence menacing. Suddenly, the car swerved around him and cut in front, forcing him to slam on his brakes. The black sedan came to a dead stop in the middle of the road. Jake's heart pounded as he sat frozen in his seat, watching the car. It didn't move. The windows were too dark to see inside, but something about the vehicle felt wrong, unnatural. Gathering his courage, Jake stepped out of his truck. "Hey, what's your problem?" he shouted, his voice echoing into the foggy night. There was no response. He approached the car cautiously, but as he neared, the engine revved and the car sped off into the darkness, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The next day, Jake told his friends about the encounter. His best friend, Markia, laughed it off. "Sounds like you've been working too many late nights. Maybe you imagined it." But Lily, Jake's girlfriend, wasn't so sure. "You've heard the stories about the phantom car, right? What if it was that?" Jake shrugged it off, not wanting to admit that the thought unnerved him. It was probably just some idiot messing around. However, over the next few days, reports began to spread around town. Several people claimed to have seen the same black sedan. Some said it followed them briefly before vanishing, while others swore they heard an eerie hum whenever it appeared. Each sighting added to the growing unease in Raven Creek. Curious about the sudden spike in sightings, Jake decided to do some research. He visited the local library where he found old newspaper articles about a string of disappearances in the 1960s. According to the reports, several people had vanished after last being seen near an abandoned road just outside town. Witnesses claimed that a black sedan had been spotted near the area before each disappearance. Digging further, Jake learned about a man named Richard Grayson, a wealthy businessman who had died in a car crash on that very road. The legend claimed that Grayson had been racing home one stormy night when he lost control of his car and plunged into the ravine below. His body was never found, and locals believed that his spirit had returned, bound to his car, forever doomed to drive the roads of Raven Creek, seeking vengeance. Determined to find the truth, Jake convinced Lily and Mark to accompany him to the road where Grayson had supposedly crashed. They arrived at dusk, the setting sun casting long shadows over the desolate road. "Are you sure about this?" Lily asked, clutching Jake's arm tightly. "We just need to see if the car shows up," Jake replied, though he didn't sound entirely confident. They waited for what felt like hours, the tension growing with each passing minute. Just as they were about to give up, they heard it, the low hum of an engine approaching from the distance. A chill ran down their spines as the black sedan emerged from the fog, its headlights glowing like twin orbs in the darkness. Without thinking, Jake waved at the car, signaling it to stop. To his surprise, it did. The doors opened, revealing an empty interior. Jake exchanged a nervous glance with his friends. I think it wants us to get in." "You can't be serious," Mark exclaimed. "This is insane." But Jake felt an inexplicable pull, as if the car was calling to him. Against his better judgment, he climbed into the driver's seat. Lily and Mark reluctantly followed, sitting in the back. The moment they closed the doors, the car roared to life and sped off, the steering wheel moving on its own. The car raced down the road at breakneck speed, the scenery outside blurring as they hurtled forward. Jake tried to grab the wheel, but it wouldn't budge. "It's driving itself," he shouted, panic rising in his voice. Lily screamed as the car swerved around a sharp bend, narrowly avoiding the edge of the ravine. "What does it want from us?" "I don't know," Jake yelled, frantically searching for a way to stop the car. Suddenly, he remembered the legend. "Grayson, if you can hear me, we're not your enemies. Let us go." The car didn't slow down. Instead, the hum grew louder, almost deafening. Jake realized they were heading straight toward the ravine where Grayson had died. Desperate, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small locket he had found at the crash site earlier. "Is this what you're looking for?" he shouted, holding it up. The car jerked violently, then skidded to a halt just inches from the edge of the ravine. The hum faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Slowly, the doors unlocked, and the three friends scrambled out, gasping for breath. As they backed away, the car began to dissolve into mist, vanishing into the night. The locket in Jake's hand grew warm, then cold, as if releasing the spirit trapped within. News of their encounter spread quickly through Raven Creek. Many believed that Jake had freed Richard Grayson's spirit, putting an end to the curse of the phantom car. The road remained empty after that night, and no one ever saw the black sedan again. But sometimes on foggy nights, travelers claimed to hear a faint hum in the distance, a reminder of the car that once drove itself, taking its passengers to their doom. It began as an ordinary evening in the small coastal town of Black Hollow. Nestled between jagged cliffs and a dense forest, the town had weathered countless storms over the years. The townsfolk were used to fierce winds and crashing waves battering the shoreline. But on this particular night, something felt different. The air was heavy, charged with an unnatural stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. By the time the first dark clouds rolled in, a sense of unease had already settled over Black Hollow. Families huddled inside their homes, listening to the distant rumble of thunder growing closer. The sky turned a sickly shade of green, and a strange, almost metallic scent filled the air. That's when the whispers began. It was Thomas Grady, the town's lighthouse keeper, who first noticed something was amiss. From his post high above the cliffs, he had a clear view of the approaching storm. As lightning flashed across the horizon, he saw shapes moving along the beach below. Figures stumbling through the mist, illuminated briefly by each crack of lightning. At first, he thought they were townsfolk caught in the storm, but something about their movements was off. They moved stiffly, their limbs jerking unnaturally, as if pulled by invisible strings. Grabbing his lantern, Thomas made his way down to the shore to investigate. When he reached the beach, he froze in terror. The figures were not living people. They were the long-dead residents of Black Hollow. Their faces were pale, their eyes vacant, and their clothes hung in tattered remnants of what they had been buried in. Thomas recognized a few of them. Old Man Harris, who had drowned at sea 10 years ago. Margaret Finch, who had died of fever decades earlier. These were people who should have remained in their graves. Meanwhile, in the town square, panic was spreading. Those who ventured outside reported seeing more of the dead rising, men, women, and children who had perished long ago. The cemetery at the edge of town had been disturbed. The graves cracked open as if something had clawed its way out. The storm raged on, bringing with it torrential rain and howling winds. But amidst the chaos, a strange, rhythmic humming could be heard, a sound that seemed to resonate with the storm itself. Some claimed it was coming from the cliffs, while others said it was emanating from the ocean. In the town hall, the mayor, Edgar Whitmore, tried to maintain order. "Everyone, stay indoors. Lock your doors and windows. This is just some strange weather phenomenon. We'll get through it." But his voice betrayed his fear. No one had ever seen anything like this before. Among the frightened townsfolk was Emily Carter, a young woman whose mother had passed away 2 years earlier. As she peered out of her window, she saw something that made her heart stop. Her mother, standing in the street, soaked by the rain but otherwise unchanged since the day she had been buried. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she opened the door, ignoring the protests of her younger brother, Sam. "Mom," she whispered, stepping out into the storm. Her mother turned slowly to face her, but there was no recognition in her eyes. Instead, she opened her mouth and let out a low, hollow moan before lurching toward Emily with unnatural speed. Terrified, Emily stumbled back into the house, slamming the door shut just as her mother's hands clawed at the wood. Sam bolted the door, and they watched in horror as the figure outside eventually wandered away, disappearing into the storm. "It's not her, Emily," Sam said, his voice shaking. "It looks like her, but it's not. Whatever's out there, it's not human." As dawn approached, the storm showed no signs of letting up. Desperate for answers, a group of townsfolk, led by Thomas Grady and the mayor, decided to head to the cliffs. Rumor had it that the storm was somehow connected to an ancient shipwreck that had occurred centuries ago, a ship carrying cursed relics from a distant land. According to legend, the ship, known as the Revenant, had sunk just off the coast during a violent storm. Survivors had claimed that the crew had brought something aboard, an artifact said to have the power to blur the line between life and death. No one had ever found the wreckage, but now, with the dead rising, many believed the artifact had something to do with the current storm. Reaching the cliffs, the group braved the lashing winds and blinding rain. Below them, the ocean churned violently, and in the distance they saw something glowing beneath the waves, a faint, pulsating light. It was as if the sea itself was alive, breathing in time with the strange hum that filled the air. "We have to stop it," Thomas said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Whatever's down there, it's the source of all this." "But how?" Edgar asked. "We can't exactly swim out there in this storm." Thomas pointed toward a nearby rowboat. "We don't have to. We'll row as close as we can and see if we can destroy whatever's causing this." Despite their fear, a few brave souls volunteered to join him, including Emily, who was determined to end the nightmare that had brought her mother back in such a horrifying form. Battling the raging sea, the group rowed toward the glowing light. The closer they got, the louder the hum became, vibrating through their bones. Suddenly, the water around them began to stir, and ghostly figures emerged from the depths. Phantom sailors from the wreck of the Revenant. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light, and their skeletal hands reached for the boat. "Keep rowing," Thomas shouted, swinging an oar at one of the phantoms. The others joined in, fighting off the spectral crew as they neared the source of the glow. At the heart of the disturbance lay a massive ancient chest, half buried in the sand beneath the waves. It pulsed with an unnatural energy, each pulse sending ripples through the water and the storm above. Realizing they had no other option, Thomas grabbed a heavy anchor from the boat and dove into the water. Fighting against the current, he reached the chest and smashed it open. A blinding light erupted from within, followed by a deafening silence. The storm ceased instantly. The wind died down, and the rain stopped falling. The ocean calmed, and the ghostly figures faded into nothingness. Exhausted, Thomas was pulled back into the boat by the others, gasping for breath, but alive. When they returned to shore, they found the town eerily quiet. The dead who had risen were gone. Their bodies returned to their graves as if nothing had happened. The only sign of the storm was the lingering scent of salt in the air and the broken branches scattered across the streets. Life in Black Hollow slowly returned to normal, but the townsfolk never forgot the night of the resurrection storm. The wreck of the Revenant was never seen again, and no one dared search for its remains. Yet on stormy nights, some claimed they could still hear a faint hum in the distance, as if the sea itself remembered the ancient curse, and the night it brought the dead back to life. In the heart of a remote forest in Everbrook County, there is a narrow, winding road known only to the locals as Black Hollow Road. It stretches for miles through dense, ancient woods where sunlight barely penetrates the thick canopy of gnarled trees. The road appears ordinary at first glance. Cracked pavement, faded yellow lines, and rusted old mile markers. Yet for decades, stories have circulated about travelers who ventured down Black Hollow Road and were never seen again. Some dismiss the tales as superstition or urban legend. Others, however, believed there was something far more sinister at work, something that defied reason. The first recorded disappearance occurred in the winter of 1954. George and Eleanor Braxton, a married couple returning home from a family gathering, were last seen driving along Black Hollow Road. When they failed to arrive, a search party was dispatched. The authorities found no sign of the Braxtons or their car. Their tracks vanished midway down the road, as if they had simply driven into thin air. Over the years, more travelers vanished under similar circumstances. Families, lone drivers, even entire caravans were swallowed by the road, leaving behind only whispers of dread. Strangely, none of the disappearances occurred during the day. They always happened at night, when the road was cloaked in darkness and the forest was alive with unsettling noises. As the disappearances continued, theories about Black Hollow Road grew wilder. Some believed the road was cursed, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead was thin. Others speculated about an old witch who had once lived deep in the forest and cast a spell to trap the unwary. A few even claimed it was a portal to another dimension, where those who entered were lost forever. Despite the fear surrounding it, Black Hollow Road remained open. It was the only route connecting the nearby towns of Pine Gate and Ashford, and many who traveled it had no choice but to face its eerie reputation. In the fall of 1987, a young journalist named Lila Harper decided to investigate the disappearances. Skeptical by nature, she dismissed the supernatural theories as nonsense. To her, there was a logical explanation, a series of unsolved kidnappings perhaps, or a stretch of road prone to dangerous conditions that could cause cars to veer off into the forest, hidden by dense undergrowth. Armed with a camera, a notepad, and a flashlight, Lila set out one evening to drive the length of Black Hollow Road. She promised her editor she would return by midnight with a compelling story. But Lila never returned. When Lila's disappearance made headlines, the town was thrown into chaos. Her family, desperate for answers, offered a large reward to anyone who could find her. Despite their fears, a few brave locals organized a search party. They combed every inch of the road and surrounding forest but found nothing. No car, no belongings, no trace of Lila at all. One searcher, however, claimed to have heard something strange while walking near the road's edge. A faint whispering sound that seemed to come from the trees themselves. It was as if unseen voices were calling out, just beyond the reach of the searchlights. In the spring of 1992, a truck driver named Bill Parsons had a chilling encounter on Black Hollow Road. Driving late at night, he spotted a figure standing on the side of the road, waving for help. Slowing down, he saw it was a young woman in a torn coat, her face pale and frightened. He pulled over and offered her a ride. As they drove, the woman remained silent, staring straight ahead. Bill, unnerved by her behavior, asked if she was all right. Without turning, she whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Before he could respond, the woman vanished. One moment she was in the passenger seat, and the next, she was gone. Shaken, Bill reported the incident to the police, describing the woman in detail. To his horror, they showed him a photograph of Lila Harper. It was the same woman he had picked up that night. By the early 2000s, Black Hollow Road had gained nationwide infamy. Paranormal investigators, thrill seekers, and journalists flocked to Everbrook County, hoping to uncover the truth. One group, calling themselves the Midnight Explorers, decided to camp out near the road and document their experience. On the night of their expedition, they set up cameras along the road's edge and began their investigation. Around midnight, strange phenomena began to occur. The temperature dropped suddenly and a dense fog rolled in, obscuring their view. Their equipment malfunctioned, and the air was filled with a low, droning hum, as if the forest itself was alive. One of the explorers, Jason Mills, wandered off into the fog, calling out to something only he could see. His companions tried to follow, but Jason vanished before their eyes. His terrified cries echoed through the woods, growing fainter until they ceased altogether. The remaining explorers fled, abandoning their equipment. When they returned with authorities the next day, there was no sign of Jason or their campsite. The footage they recovered showed only static, punctuated by brief glimpses of shadowy figures moving in the fog. In 2015, a breakthrough came when a local historian, Evelyn Clark, uncovered an ancient map in the town's archives. It depicted the area before the road was built, showing an old settlement called Black Hollow Village that had mysteriously disappeared in the late 1800s. According to legend, the villagers had dabbled in dark rituals, seeking to commune with the spirits of the forest. One night, the entire village vanished without a trace, leaving only the road behind. Evelyn theorized that the road now occupied a place where time and space were fractured, a liminal zone where those who traveled too far could slip into another reality. Despite her compelling research, no one dared to test her theory. To this day, Black Hollow Road remains open, though few dare to travel it after dark. The disappearances continue sporadically, each one shrouded in mystery. Some claim to see ghostly figures wandering the road at night, while others hear whispers in the wind, calling them deeper into the forest. Locals warn visitors to avoid Black Hollow Road altogether. If you value your life, they say, don't drive it after sunset. And if you hear the whispers, don't answer. Just keep driving, and never look back. For those who ignore the warnings, there's no guarantee they'll ever be seen again.